Alright, so today I'm going to show you how to do a 3D optical illusion to make it look as though it's kind of like hopping off the paper. Alright, so it's a really simple floating illusion. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to take a ruler, and then on your piece of paper you're just going to very lightly draw a line going across the top of the paper like this. So you're just going across, and then you're going to draw your things. Now for this example, I'm just going to draw something super simple, so I'm just going to draw a circle for this one, and I'll show you something a little bit more complicated. So say if I wanted to have like a floating basketball illusion, I would first draw out the circle of the ball, erase the inside line, and then you want to make sure that your lines are pretty crisp, so I would go back through, kind of darken the edges that you want it to be like this. That way you have like the shape that you want the thing that you're drawing an illusion to be. So here I have a ball. I want it to be a sphere, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to incorporate shading. Now you can do this with black and white, or you can do it with color. I'm just going to do mine in black and white, so I'm just going to roughly add a darker spot. Now, very important, something I didn't mention, but you want to think of the light source. So I'm just going to say that my light's coming from this side. So if it's coming from this side, this is going to be the brightest spot, and this is going to be the darkest spot. So that's why I'm shading just this half of the ball. Now, what I'm doing right now is I'm just establishing what I call the mid-tone layer. So I'm just adding like a medium dark. And then what I'm going to do back is now I'm going to add a darker shadow on the very edge here. Now you can do other things like bounce light and stuff, but since this is a floating ball, I'm not too concerned about it. This is just an example. So I'm just going to add a little bit of a darker shadow. And then what you can do is you can either blend it in by cross-hatching a little bit in between by moving your pencil back and forth in different directions, or if you can use a tissue or your finger to blend it. Now, if you're making this more elaborate, I wouldn't use your finger because your finger has oils in it and that might ruin your drawing. I would use a tissue, but this is just a rough example, so I don't really care. All right, so once you have your shading done and you're satisfied with your shading, let's say if I was going to make this a basketball, I would draw like the lines that make up the lines in a basketball or whatevs, like this. Then you can kind of buff out those a little bit. And then, very important, before you move on, erase anything that's not supposed to be there. So I'm going to erase all of these smudgy lines that got on the outside. I'm erasing some of these extra pencil lines that I didn't erase before. So it's very important that you want to try to make this look as 3D as possible. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to really shade those edges to make it look really dark on just the edges. Now, you don't want to shade the entire edge because otherwise it won't feel as three-dimensional. So make sure that you're not going overboard with your super darks. You want just a little bit of those super darks. And then, of course, if you want to buff it, you can. Just remember that if you do choose to buff like this instead of doing cross-hatching, always make sure you go back and erase anything that's extra. All right, so now that I have my ball sketched out, then what I want to do, in order to make it look like it's floating, I'm going to go down below the ball, and then I'm going to draw a shape that is kind of like the similar one here because I want to flatten it. So if you think of a circle, if a circle's like this, when you tilt the circle, it turns into an oval shape, right? So below this ball, I'm going to draw kind of an oval shape like this. I'm just going to fill it in with some shading. Now I'm using medium shading. I'm not using super dark. I'm just using it as kind of a medium shadow. I'm just going to buff it. Now on this one, I want the edges to be kind of soft because if you think about a shadow, the edges of a shadow are pretty soft. So here I'm just buffing the edges to make them look soft, so like this. All right, now to really sell this illusion, the last thing that you're going to do is you're going to get a pair of scissors, and then you're going to cut along that line that you made before. Be very careful not to damage your drawing though, so as soon as you get to the drawing, stop. Go to the other side, do the same thing. All right, and then you're just going to cut around the ball. Be very, very clean with your cut. Make sure that you're not too messy with it. If you have any white edges around it, that might kind of mess up with your illusion. Just going to go like this, all the way around. And voila. So now it kind of gives me the illusion of a ball that is kind of bouncing off the paper. And you can strengthen this by going even darker or by adding some color or something. So it's kind of up to you how much you want to strengthen this illusion. But there's a kind of a little pseudo illusion of a ball bouncing off of the ground. And then just keep working on your shadows until you are satisfied. But I think this looks pretty okay. It looks as though that ball, I could pick it up even though I physically am not able to because it's just a piece of paper. But it looks pretty fun. This is a great experiment to do with your art. And of course, you can do things much more complicated than just a basketball. But yeah, there you go. All right, have fun. All right, so here's just a really quick example of something that you can do if you want to do something a little bit more complicated. So here I'm just drawing a doggo just kind of like, I guess, jumping or something. So all you do is you just basically draw it like you would normally draw whatever it is that you're choosing to draw. The key thing is all about the shading. If you're not very familiar excuse me, if you're not very familiar with like shading and stuff, definitely try to see if you can kind of like look at objects that you see around you and see how they interact with the light. If you don't have a strong light source, maybe put it closer to like a lamp, or find the light and try to put your object closer to it. That way you can kind of see how the light interacts on the object. You'll notice that some parts of the object turn to like darker shades and stuff, and other parts will remain really bright. The really thing that can really help pop this illusion is if you have what is called high contrast. That's where you have something really, really dark next to something really, really light. So in this case, I'm using my eraser and going back and trying to lighten up those areas and then darken in the others, so that I have really, really bright areas next to really dark areas. And that really pops the contrast and makes it feel a little bit more lifelike and a little bit more 3D. So if you're ever wondering why your art's just not feeling quite three-dimensional, it's definitely one thing that you can try doing, is trying to pop up that contrast. So here, I'm pretty satisfied with the drawing. I could definitely do better. This is just a quick example, just so you can kind of see what you can do with it. But yeah, so whenever you are cutting it out, remember to be very careful as you're cutting out. Now this one was a little bit trickier because it has fur. Fur is a nightmare to cut out. But just be patient with it. Take your time. You can cut off chunks at a time if you need to. You don't have to cut it all out at once. But just be patient with it and take your time so that it ends up looking the way that you want it to. So after I cut it out, usually what I do is I go back and just kind of re-darken some of the areas and add a little bit more shading to the edges, just to really help make it pop. All right, so there we go. I hope you guys had fun watching this, and if you need any help, always feel free to ask. Thanks.